Yesterday and tonight is opening an exhibition which is entitled Rethinking Collections. It's an exhibition which is opening in the Museum of Africa in Tervuren. I was living for many years almost next door. So I know the museum, and Sammy knows the museum very, very well, probably much better than I do, because he was in residence as of 2008 in that very same museum. But in that same museum tonight is opening Rethinking Collections, because you probably read it in the press. The museum in Tervuren has in the meanwhile established an inventory of 82,343 objects, which are kind of suspicious, because they were taken from the Congo by military, by politicians, by entrepreneurs, probably also by the king himself, n'est-ce pas? And what's interesting in rethinking collections, and it's also a development in terms of the provenance, studying the provenance of objects, is that they are not going to look at each object separately, they're going to look at the objects connected to names. 82,343 objects are connected to about 400 names. Names of expedition leaders, names of military men, names of missionaries as well. And departing from these 400 names, they're going to establish categories, and then we'll see what happens. At the same time today in Paris and I was there this morning at 8:30 at the German embassy. At the same time in Paris was an agreement signed between the French and the German government that they are going to work together on the restitution of objects. Of course, we're going to talk about restitution. Of course, we're going to talk about rethinking collections, because it's all part of the work of Sammy. How did I meet Sammy? I met Sammy in Africa. I was invited by the Goethe Institute in a project led by a fantastic theoretician. His name is Simon Njami, and Simon Njami was leading a photo workshop throughout Africa. So we traveled together as of 2009 from Bamako. We went to Lubumbashi, we went to Addis Abeba, we went to Khartoum, we went to Johannesburg, and Sammy was the oldest of all these young photographers. And indeed, photography is in Africa is a medium par excellence. Sammy was the oldest, and I can tell that here off the record, he was also the best. And so we decided to get Sammy over from the student group into the teaching group. And that was fascinating, because when I say Sammy was the best, when we met each other in 2009 in Bamako, he told me about workshops and residency he was doing in Tervuren. He told me about this context with the Smithsonian. So it went on and on and on. And instead of teaching him, he was teaching me. I learned so much about the Congo, of the Museum of Africa in Tervuren, thanks to Sammy Baloji. In 2012, I was invited by the Centre Pompidou to speak for at least 2-3 weeks with guests, and I invited Sammy and his cousin. Who is his cousin? The name of his cousin is also Baloji, the filmmaker, the rapper, the musician. And he just premiered in Cannes in May with great success the film Augur, but that's his work, and they only shared the name. And talking about the name, when Sammy was born in 1978 in Lubumbashi, his name and the name of his cousin, Baloji, meant sorcière, sorcerer. And that was not really acceptable for many, because when you carry that name, you throw bad luck. Anyway, the two guys, they kept the name Baloji, and he still has a Congo visum, and he's going to get a Belgian passport soon. And I'm saying this because when I moved to Tate Modern, we showed Sammy Baloji in a group exhibition, and he was not allowed to come because it's very hard to travel on a Congolese visum. Now it's much easier, and you're going for the first time to London. Isn't that amazing? He's going for the first time. Wow, applause. Let's give him a big hand. but it's part of his economical and social reality, okay? And after the events at Tate Modern with Sammy Baloji and the Centre Pompidou, we kept meeting each other. And I recall one important meeting. I saw Sammy in Berlin, and Sammy said, I'm now in the Rolex program, the mentorship program of Rolex watches, not Cartier, Rolex. And so one of the mentors was, his mentor was Oliver Eliasson, and he said to Sammy, watch out, don't just do history lessons. You have to make art. And we're going to talk about this as well, because Sammy's methodology is very based on academic work. It's very based on research work. He's surrounded by major researchers. Philippe de Buc, architectural historian. He's surrounded by Sandrine Collard, who was teaching in Colombia and is now leading the Canal in Brussels. He has all these people working for him. So I kept learning thanks to Sammy, but thanks to also his group. And this led in 2019 to a project we did together in Paris for the Grand Palais, which we're also going to show you. But we are now going to start with Sammy Baloji. And I want to start, Sammy, with this image behind me, which is an image which you can see for real, because in the Ensor exhibition in Ostend, you can see on the second floor, I believe, you can see this exhibition. And these two works are shown in the exhibition, and they are works by Sammy Baloji. These works are made thanks to the residency in the museum in Africa. And they were bought very early in 2013 by the Museum Ostend, where Sammy had a show in 2014. And if you want to learn more about Sammy Baloji, this is the book you have to buy. This is like the alphabet of Sammy Baloji, where you can find all his sources, where you can find his ideas and his images. And it's published by the Museum in Ostend. What do we see here? And maybe we should start with that. Sammy, I see an aquarelle. And the aquarelle apparently is by a Belgian artist who accompanied these expeditions. And then we see pictures. They are collaged together, and these are taken by the photographer Michel. They are part of the archival collection of the Museum in Tervuren. Why did you start making these collages where you mix different archival material together?
I came from Lubumbashi, which is the second town in Congo after Kinshasa, which is the capital. And Lubumbashi, it's part of the Katanga province that is well known for uranium that was used for the atomic bomb, copper, not coltan, but lithium actually. So we have Elon Musk there actually also interested. So we are quite modern. We've been modern since the colonial period with rubber that was exploited and so on and so on. So for me, it's really, it's been very important knowing that, my province is quite well known and it's been participating in the global economy and even on the political level. That includes also the First World War and even the Second World War, basically. And I've been asking myself why the raw materials are traveling rather than people that are living there. And also thinking about how these extractions conditions are destroying social lives or communities in Katanga, basically. But this, I didn't learn it at school, of course, but I started to learn about all this colonial presence with, and through the collaboration with Johan Laguet, who's actually an architect and is the head of the Department of Architecture here at the Ghent University. And he specialized in colonial architecture. And I started to work with him because I started as a documentary photographer I was hired by the French Institute. And we started to work with Johan because he was interested in gathering all these materials around heritage, like industrial heritage and also architectural heritage. But at the same time, even though that he was approached in order to create or to share about the heritage. He was questioning the heritage and saying that how can we speak about a common heritage while the way that actually these cities were created under the colonial period, it was under the segregation and under this racial, basically, hierarchy and so on and so forth. So basically, that was a main topic that I kept also in a way that as someone who's been born there in a modern city, a colonial modern city, basically, Lubumbashi, which is Lubumbashi. How do I recognize myself within this architecture, within this industrial heritage, and what I have as a culture, basically, which is disconnected from the pre-colonial. We will come to the pre-colonial knowledge, maybe. But there's something that is quite important for me. It's been really understanding the birth of the province or the birth of the city, basically. And this is what somehow brought me to work on these works that these two works that you're seeing here. Basically, it's a scientific expedition that happened end of 19th century, and it's an expedition by Charles Lemaire, who was sent by the colonial government to go to Congo and create these borders between Katanga and Zambia. And Zambia was Rhodesia at that time.
Creating borders, that means by disrespecting the fiefdoms and the kingdoms, isn't it?
Meaning also separating same communities from one to another, depending on where are the British presence, and that they cannot conquer that, and how to delimitate the space by dividing also communities, basically. Mm-hmm. So it's not only there, it's also Angola, where they went. And this border started from this expedition. So basically, for me, what I was interested in was to try, as I was approached to have this residency program at the Tervuren Museum, I had the possibility to get access to all these archives related to that expedition and to understand what was the process of creating.
You were one of the first artists allowed in the Museum Tervuren to work as an artist with the archival material. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And it started actually also with Johan Laguet, because he just, I think he was publishing and he was working with Karl de Keyser, the photographer.
Karl de Keyser, yeah.
He was interested in working with Karl de Keyser. And through that, he managed to sort of create also a space where, as he knew me, and he knew that there were photographers in Congo. So he sort of claimed a residency program for African artists, and especially those who are coming from Congo, because all these collections. And what you don't maybe know is that there are a lot of archives, not only just collections or ethnographic collection and so on, but there are many informations about Congo here rather than in Congo itself. We don't have libraries, we don't have, by inviting me, or Johan tried to create that connection with the Tervuren Museum, knowing that we needed those kind of connections.
How are these people reacting to you? Because ethnological museums at that time, and I'm speaking about 2008, 2009, 2010, they were still very closed. And then this young Congolese photographer, you were not an academic and you went to the museum. How were these scholars in the museum? How were the Belgian bureaucrats reacting to your presence there?
I think it's still a weird museum because...
Oh, it's still a weird museum, okay.
Because it has they have this so-called scientific department.
Scientific department, yeah.
And they are the most important. So basically it means it's a scientific museum. And they have a space for exhibitions and not really curators. So it's really a museum that it's meant for researchers, scholars, and so on. So having an artist, and at the time that they were also already thinking about decolonizing the museum, but it's also like the question is how also to decolonize the scientific research itself, you know, and how do you give access.
But how were they reacting? Because you don't have any diploma.
I bet they were not understanding what I was doing.
I can imagine, yeah. And then you were doing
I was
this,
also weird
and then you were doing this stuff. I mean, which is not at all scholarly, right?
So let's talk about objectivity, basically, and this is what I'm questioning in this exhibition. What was interesting is that there were one photographer, and at that time, photography was so important because it was meant to be objective in terms of documenting what was happening, and for scientific, it was quite important to document that. But as you can see in those portraits, there's a notion of staging, basically. So it's not like the subject was staging, but basically it's the photographer who's asking to the subject to kind of pose, you know, for the photographs in a way, which is not also at the end shared with the person who's photographed. And this is one thing, but you can also see that in the faces, there's also another power relationship that is going on where you see that the person either is not happy or is not sharing, and it's kind of unknown relation that is happening between the one who's photographing and the one that was photographed, basically. And on the other side, the other thing that is interesting, it's that there was in this expedition an artist, Dhondt-Dhaenens, who's working for a newspaper and making graphics and so on. And he convinced those scientific to be part of the expedition with the idea that photography, it's not objective because it's just in black and white, so it's not showing colors. And him, with his watercolors, he could represent what these people will be traveling and seeing through their trajectory. And exciting enough, while reading his notes of that, and it's quite interesting to see how he was comparing the light in Congo and the one from his village or from his hometown, basically. And you could understand that basically his taste or his way of using light was really connected to Belgium rather than the reality that he was going through, basically. So by bringing these two realities together, or this kind of two approach, which are not objective, basically, it's questioning these mediums that were used to create images of the savage, basically.
That's how it started, because when you started to make these works, and the project was called Congo Far West.
Yeah.
When you started to make these works, suddenly the world started to discover you. You were asked by the Smithsonian in Washington.
No, it started before that, and this is how I was even able to come to Tervuren, because I had already this exhibition, the exhibition at the Smithsonian, which started with a work that I did back in 2006 called Memoir, where I started to work with archives related to the mining company in Katanga.
But this was the breakthrough, right?
Yeah, it was.
But what's interesting, what you just said about the photographer Michel, is that photography played such a crucial role in the colonization. I mean, the missionaries, they brought the lanterns. The lanterns were a way to educate the people. Everything was documented in a way. Why was photography in the colonization in the Congo, but not just in the Congo? Why was photography so important? Was it a matter of control? Was it a matter of taking? Because it's very interesting that a picture is associated with taking away an image. I take your image, I take it away.
I mean, in the case of Congo, so it's not, I mean, of course, there were these, I mean, it was so important to document in order to create also this, I would say that to create this propaganda, basically. And this is the work that, for example, Sandrine did
Collard.
with Sandrine Collard, the exhibition that she did at FOMU.
At the Photo Museum in Antwerp.
At the Photo Museum in Antwerp, around all this types of images that were created through different decades of colonization, with different strategies, basically. But at the beginning, it was so important to kind of define the lands, basically, and the people that are encountered through these expeditions. But one should not forget also this episode that happened with these Afro-American missionaries who came to Congo in 1890s.
William Shepherd.
William Shepherd and a bunch of Afro-Americans who were living in Congo and then in this central part in Kasai. And they were the first one to document all these cutting hands that were happening during the l'État indépendant du Congo, basically. And then Alice Harris did all these photographs.
So it was basically not the Belgians who documented what was done by the colonizers to these African people. It was basically people came from other cultures like African Americans who started to document what really happened, the story.
They were the first one to do that and to send letters in London claiming that it was quite a violent state and what was happening there.
Is this the kind of work Oliver Eliasson reacted to in 2014 when he said to you, when you were his student, because he was mentoring you in the Rolex program, he was saying, remember, you have to make art and not history.
Yeah, but I think it's quite complex than that. Because it's always important to know where you come from.
And you wanted to come where you come from.
And to contextualize it. And not through the anthropology and ethnography, which are sciences that were created in the 19th century, which are colonial ones, basically. And it's not that can define what art means, basically.
So you're saying that ethnography, anthropology are, let's say, disciplines created again by the colonizer?
Isn't it true?
Think so, but you were looking for a medium which is kind of independent, which is kind of objective.
So how do you define the primitive art? How do you understand it? Why is it primitive art?
I didn't use the term primitive art.
No, but I'm just saying it's been part of the art history. When it comes to African art or indigenous art, it's rather, folk art. It's rather, primitive.
But that's what the museum interviewer tries to do, to create another form of category, because you were saying that the museum interviewer is a weird museum, but I should defend also the museum interviewer.
No, but it's even in France, you have les premiers arts. What does it mean, the premiers arts? Where do you...
I agree, but
in the art history, basically.
The weird museum in Tervuren, a few years ago, they tried to tell the visitor, you can look at these photography, you can look at these objects, you can look at it in both ways. You can look at it as instruments, you can look at it as proof, as evidence, but you can look at these objects also as a form of art.
Yeah, but the most important, it's also like these objects are most of the time explained through a certain cultural system that it's no longer exists because it's been basically controlled, and it's actually under this most, I would say, extractive, system.
But is there a third way? Are you doing are you creating the alternative way to look at these things beyond ethnography, beyond the categories, beyond the canons?
I think, yeah, so even though that you're talking about canons or you're talking about these classifications, something that you need also to think is that there are disciplines, but there are also human life that somehow combines all these elements. I mean, in our day life, for example, I have to pay taxes. So in order to pay taxes, I need to know how to calculate. So that is a pure sciences, and then I need to maybe heal myself. I need to do all these things. I need to feel emotions. I need to eat. I need to, So it means like you combining all these disciplines in your day life, basically. But when it comes to science, there's this kind of it's even difficult to think about interdisciplinary, approach, basically. And this is where art can become a space of, like rethinking, but also connecting these different sciences together, because it's behind those sciences, there are people, there are human beings, and it's all about human beings.
And you are a true connector, no? Because when you make work, you always connect many different things, which I never came up with. When we were working together on projects, you were saying, but this is connected to that, and that is connected to this. And Van de Velde, the architect of the Boekentoren, is connected even with his Art Nouveau to scarification in the Congo, because you are saying in many, many, many instances that the way Van de Velde used ornament, that these ornaments are connected to scarification. I mean, so you're a connector.
Then maybe I'm not doing history, and at the end I'm making only art, isn't it?
Okay, you got me. Very good. I will call Oliver Eliasson tonight. It's time to go to the next image. At some point, you changed from these flat works, okay, collages, you changed to installations. And here we see an installation, which is a recent one, only a few years ago. And this is an installation. It's not anymore a flat work, it's a sculpture. And this is connecting the history of taking away plants, a form of colonization, to the history of the role of African military men who were fighting for us in the First and the Second World War. Correct?
Yeah.
As an academic, I'm not an academic, but I'm going to pretend to be an academic, I would say, well, okay, you connect these things, but it doesn't make sense, right? So what do you want to say with connecting these plants with these pieces of metal which are clearly obusse, which are clearly granites? What did you want to do with that work?
It's all depend on references that you have as a scientific and that I have as someone coming from Congo, basically. So I will just say, and then references are so important because these plants, some of them are rubber, basically, plants. Here in Belgium and even in Europe, they are called domestic plants. So, because you find them only in your house or under les verrières or something like that. But in Congo, and I'm quite sure in Angola, you find them, everywhere. And basically people are not taking care of these plants because they're there all the time, basically. I mean, the plants that you can have in your house, it's only plants that have flowers, basically, but not this, So they are wild plants, and we don't take care. And I grew up like playing with them, basically. So when I started to work on this project, which somehow, and moving to installation is a way of realizing, of figuring out of limitation of photography. as a medium, basically. Coming back to what we were saying, that realizing that photography was used to create this image of the other, and to what extent am I able to use the same medium in order to deconstruct and to bring another language within the art, and having that sort of the control of the context where I'm speaking from. And this is something that I started. It's not really this, but yeah. So coming back to this work, what I was interested in is knowing that the First World War was somehow the revisitations of colonies. Like in Congo, I mean in Africa, we had Namibia, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, and part of Cameroon were Germans' colonies, basically. And it's changed after the First World War. So the map changed. I mean, the African map, which was based on the Conférence de Berlin. And the Conférence de Berlin, it's known as Conférence du Congo. It's where you start to understand that what plays a big role in it. And so while the war was happening, there was also an important extraction happening in Congo of copper and raw materials that were sent in order to create to fabricate all these ammunition, basically. So probably in all these mortar shells, there are Congo's mineral resources, basically. So they are not only Congo mineral resources that are processed. Since the colonial period to now, all these raw material are processed outside of the continent and not on the continent. That creates also another imbalance between those two. This relation between the north and the south, basically. So not only in all these mortar shells, probably there are Congo's mineral. Even if it's Germans' ammunitions or British ammunitions or Allies' ammunitions and so on, but there are Congo's mineral or raw materials in it. And the plant, just in order to finish, is that these plants, I asked the maize garden, the Jardin de Maison.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked them where can if I could have a list of plants that are growing in a copper region, in the mining region.
In Katanga?
In Katanga, basically. So they gave me a list of plants, and I started to buy them. So basically, you do buy them at the mason, or you buy them. So all these plants are coming from outside,
mm-hmm.
and then they are.
And then, what the result is a kind of ornament, no? The mortar shell is used in combination with the plant as a kind of ornament.
But at least I'm bringing the two elements together,
yes,
which are subject of extraction,
right.
Actually.
And now let's talk about Henri van der Velde as an extractor.
That's another story.
Was he really looking at scarification, or you made that up?
What happened actually, it's at the time of the first, the 1897 World Fair that happened at Tervuren, basically le secrétaire général du Congo, brought different raw materials such as ivory, copper, and different woods that were coming from Congo. And he invited artists, include Henri van der Velde. He invited also Aubé, Paul Anka, and a bunch of them in order to use those materials in their artworks, basically. And this is where there's a disconnection between Henri van der Velde and the Congo. And not only that, his brother was also in Congo.
the brother of Henri van der Velde.
So basically, you have this connection because I mean there was this exhibition that happened in '97, and all this ornament and all the artwork that created, and even the canvases that were used in order to present Congo's object that were brought from Congo for the World Fair. Basically, they all became part of what became the Tervuren, the ethnographic museum. So the ethnographic actually museum started from a commission that was given to artists, architect and designer with materials that came from Congo, like raw material that were transformed. And the exhibition these exhibitions were used as a propaganda, but that's also a way of creating an interest in how to invest into the colony, basically. So these are the connections, you know. But the inspiration, yes. There was this professor, what her name again, Deborah Silverman, who was actually tracing really these connections between like the whip that were used in Congo in order to punish people who were not giving the rubber, and she was trying to really connect that with the Art Nouveau style on one side. The other element were also the scarifications, and the third one is in, for example, Horta's style. You do find the elephant coming back. Sound, which is connected because you don't see an elephant here in Belgium, basically. So these are the connections where inspirations comes also from where all these materials are coming from, basically.
Another form of connecting was the work we commissioned you to do for the Grand Palais. Can we talk about this work? Because this is very strange. I mean, you see here, basically, you see these two forms which are looking like diamonds. I guess it has to do with diamond extraction in Africa, in Katanga. Then I see two instruments. How can I make sense of this, Sammy? Because I even see scarification on top of the cover. I mean, can you explain these connections? This is at the Grand Palais. In the Grand Palais, there is one connection I understood when we started working together on this, is that Giraud, the architect of the Grand Palais, happens to be also the architect of the Museum in Tervuren. The Museum in Tervuren is a small version of the Grand Palais, in fact. And you decided to create, for one of the main entrances of Tervuren, you decided to create these two instruments. Can you speak about these connections?
But you should start by explaining actually the context of the Grand Palais, why the Grand Palais, and I mean as a building basically, and why those two pedestals were empty. I mean, he was the director, he was the one who commissioned the work, so maybe to put a bit of a background before just kidding.
Okay. The Grand Palais was created for the World Exhibition in 1900. And the Grand Palais had this incredible sculpture program. It was not the only one. When you think about the Opéra de Garnier in Paris, there were about 85 sculptors involved. Okay, that's a lot. In the Grand Palais, there were less sculptors involved, but about 50. And they had to make sculptures to decorate the Grand Palais. We found out that there were many empty sockles, and so we decided to ask a sculptor maker, in this case Sammy Baloji, to come up with two sculptures for one of the entrances of the Grand Palais. What I learned from this guy, which I didn't know, is that in 1900, W.E. Du Bois, who was a very famous African-American researcher, that he was part of the World Exhibition in the Grand Palais, and he presented on the walls in a very ornamental way. He presented statistics about the economics of American slavery in an Art Deco and almost an Art Nouveau way. Can you imagine figures, names on the wall by Du Bois? And so Sammy said to me, there are so many connections between the Grand Palais, Tervuren, between the Grand Palais and colonization, because there were many more colonial exhibitions in the Grand Palais. And there was even a very important one in 1966 when Senghor and Malraux decided that one of the main exhibitions of the Festival Mondial des Arts Nègres in Dakar was brought to Paris. So there were all these connections. So it was quite natural that we asked this guy to come up with two sculptors, right? So that's how it started. And he came with two instruments and with this very strange metal framework. What does that mean?
So let's go back first to metals, like the copper that I used in this work. Just as I said at the beginning, that I'm really interested in the circulation of raw materials that are coming from Congo, and knowing that these raw materials were not just extracted by the colonial system, but even the previous communities that were living in those territories were also using these resources for different reasons, include also economical one. You all know these Katanga crosses that were used as a currency during the pre-colonial time, in a way. So for me, then rather than using photography, I thought like it's kind of interesting because as all this raw material coming from Congo, it's processed with other materials. So wherever I find copper, there might be something from Congo. So in order also to sort of really connect, because in terms of even the soil, even the relation to the history or histories, basically. So the raw materials were used in the pre-colonial time, they were used in the colonial period, and they are still used in the post-colonial. So the copper is somehow a bridge between the past, the present, and the future. And if it's connects these times, then I can start also to inscribe on top of this metal memories of those communities that were sort of colonized, and all these values that are lost through this modern system, and how to just remember, but not remember in order to understand what it meant to produce this kind of scarification, but how just to remember or to celebrate, and also to project another way of thinking. That could be a third one or whatever, but it's all a matter of how people make sense together, and it's all about decisions. So this is one thing, and the other, it's looking at the slavery trade, so the transatlantic trade that happened even before the colonization. It's looking at what happened in Haiti, and the reason why Haiti became one of the first slave territory to become free. It's due to this San Domingo revolt
against Napoleon.
And against Napoleon. And here comes Paris and France. And really looking at the Congo Square, where it was a place where the slaves in Louisiana were allowed to meet up during the weekend
and dance and make music.
And this is the place where jazz started.
And it was called Congo Square in Louisiana. It's still called Congo Square,
basically. And actually, it started also with these military instruments that were left by French military.
They fled and they left all their military instruments, their music instruments,
after losing the fight in San Domingo.
And the revolting slaves started to use these instruments.
Yeah, but it's also like Napoleon knew that the Spanish were coming, so he decided to sell Louisiana to Americans, and in order to prepare the war in France. So all these militaries had to leave all these instruments and came back to France for another fight that they were waiting for. And this is how this instrument entered into the community, the black community. So it's kind of interesting.
And that's how
to
these
see.
instruments then came to Congo?
It came with the Afro-American.
Oh, the African Americans, they brought these instruments,
this is where, yes.
left during the...
No, but I mean, like these photographs, basically, it's a brass band with William Shepard in Congo back in 1890. So
what a
it's
story.
this kind of aller-retour, basically.
Do you find out these things yourself, or do you have a group of people who help you to read text, to study archives?
I do collaborate a lot and I do research, yes.
So you have Philippe de Boek, you have Sandrine Collard, you have many people working for you.
Not working for me. I mean, like a matching
so
interest,
you're colonizing Belgium right now. Yeah? Very interesting. Incredible.
And you're inviting me to colonize because you're the one who invited me.
Yeah, that's true. But so this is actually, your projects become, I would say, bigger and bigger, more and more complex.
Just to end up with the crystals shapes, basically, it's all these geological studies done by Belgian scientific in Congo, like in describing different mineral resources, basically.
This is a view of the Museum in Tervuren, the weird museum. I mean, the Museum in Tervuren is not hiding away from these clichés, from these colonial depictions. Why do you call it a weird museum?
No, I mean, I'm calling it the Weird Museum not because people are weird there, it's not about that, but it's just like, it's, I mean...
Does it hurt you to see these things? Should they be hidden? Should they be destroyed? Should they be taken away?
I'm not a museum director, basically.
But does these images disturb you?
No, it's not about that I'm saying that it's a weird museum. I'm saying it's a weird museum because first it was a Leopold property, basically. I mean, he's the one who built it. So it's connected to the royal family, you know, and then it's only became a Belgian institution after 1908.
Independence, yeah.
Basically. And I'm saying weird, it's how Belgium is dealing that reality of the colonial past and the royal family property to what Belgium would like to do with it. So this is why I'm saying weird. So it's not even about the fact that these the sculptures are, I mean, sort of like excluded, but still you can see them. So I don't know.
You're not disturbed. You are not disturbed by these images, by these sculptures.
I'm quite disturbed by the non-position of Belgium around this colonial history. Basically, I'm not disturbed about this sculpture, but it's this non-real position around this topic, basically, you know, that disturbs me.
We had a conversation a few years ago in Paris where I asked you and others the question, what do you think about toppling sculptures? What do you think about destroying sculptures? I mean, we had the case in Tervuren and in Brussels also, where one of the statues, one of the busts of Leopold II was vandalized. And you said in that discussion, I don't think that destroying or removing these sculptures or busts is a good idea. We should do something else with it.
Yeah, but this is where Samuel gets in, because it's part of the Middle Museum and connected to Antwerp art program, basically public art program, and they commissioned me a work that it's actually, you can see at the harbor of the old harbor of Antwerp, and they asked me to work, and one of the questions was like, would you like to work on a decolonial or react to a colonial monument? And I said, no, I'm not really interested in, because again, I think that's a Belgian history, and they have to deal with it, and I'm not the one, and I don't want to be used as a reason to deal with that reason. I mean, that's.
But for you,
and I don't want to make a sculpture that will be facing the colonial ones, because I'm kind of creating a dependent relationship between my work and the monument that it's been done for something else. So my work will not be seen without the other monument. So I'd rather think about go somewhere else and do my stuff. And these colonial things should be really dealt by Belgians.
okay, so tell us Belgians, tell me Belgian, what I should do with these statues.
Why should I? Why me?
I mean, maybe you can advise
the
us,
is,
you know?
No, I mean, the question
So we have
is,
to find out for ourselves.
I mean, you know what it's mean, and what is the statement of the sculpture in a public space. And now, I mean, like when you were presenting, you were saying that rethinking the collection means like we need to see the biography of every object. So you should also start by thinking like biography of all the statues that are in the city, and if those like biographies are connected with the political statement that you're talking like today as a Democrat, as a progressive, as a, you know, as more open person, or, you know, is there a sense?
It makes sense, but in that context, you are using the word, and I heard it now 6 times tonight, you're using the word decolonizing. What is that, decolonizing? I know it's a very fashionable word. It has a lot of meanings, but why? What does that mean, decolonizing the museum?
Did I say that?
Yes, you said it 6 times. I wrote it down. Absolutely. I listen. I'm listening.
As a word
you
that...
You used the word decolonizing all the time.
I wasn't saying about a program of decolonization or something.
Yes, but you used also the word decolonizing the museum.
Only the museum.
I mean, in general, what does it mean, decolonizing?
No, but I'm trying to tackle the question. No. So there are philosophers such as like Bruno Latour. I mean, like, for example, I'm working with David van Rijbroek.
David van Rijbroek.
I'm working with...
Voilà. We rehearsed this conference like the whole week, you see. When he says David van Rijbroek, I have an image. Okay, so go on. Here's the image, right?
So, just like, I mean, this is where also the circulation, not only of raw material, but also of plants, it's really connected to the equatorial line, but it's also connected to the fact that in Congo we have the forest that is, actually it's one of the most important in terms of decarbonization, basically. But it's not only that one, you have the Indonesia one and you have Amazonia, but both are on the equatorial line. And when you realize that most of the colonial architects, the Belgian colonial architects, or even engineers, even agronomes, were going most of the time in Indonesia to learn from Dutch or British colony and so on before coming to Congo in order to create the tropical architecture, basically. It's really linked to, you know, the equatorial line, but also this idea of creating this world food, basically. And that's where it's it's quite interesting to see that. Well, how can I put it? And this is where, for example, Bruno Latour or David Van Rybroek, or even all this notion of Anthropocene, or even the climate crisis.
What does that to do? Yes.
The climate crisis. It's all comes out of the human activity and the way that we are producing and consuming, and then we need to, we are on the point that we have to rethink this relation to the landscape, to the environment, and this is where comes the environmental justice and so on and so on. Just in terms of production, and pollution, but even that, and the result on the landscape needs to be rethink in a way.
So
that's for me. It's
decolonizing.
It's a decolonization.
Rethinking is decolonization.
I mean, is this process? Do you feel like we have a future with the way that we're living? Is that the question, basically?
I told you this week that I read a piece by Olufemi Taiwo, who says the idea of a pre-colonial Africa is theoretically fascist, racist, and playing wrong about the continent's actual history. He said, you guys are reducing us to the trinity of pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial. You are using the word pre-colonial also often. There are some theoreticians who say, stop talking about this trinity of pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial. I mean, let's talk about Africa, African culture. Let's talk about in a completely different way.
Yeah, but this is where I wasn't really even understanding why you were asking me the question around the notion of decolonization. So basically, I think I'm using pre-colonial in terms of timeline, basically, but not in terms of concept, basically. Okay. But it's also interesting to use pre-colonial time because I started to be interested on finding traces of pre-colonial knowledges, just because one of the reasons that Leopold had a Congo at the Berlin conference was with this philanthropical idea, and also this idea of bringing civilization. So starting from that, if you prove that there was a certain notion of civilization or certain traces of civilization, then you realize that the colonial propaganda, it doesn't stand. So pre-colonial, it's really in terms of timeline, but we both agree that, again, past, present, and even future, and this is where, for example, I don't see myself within the Afrofuturism. I don't.
Watch out, Afrofuturism. that's another thing. I mean, let me introduce this to you by the following. I've been working just like Sammy with young photographers when we were traveling through Africa, and they kept talking, some of them, about Afrofuturism. And when I asked them, they said, listen, don't ask us to think about what Africa can be and should be in 10, 20, 30 years. We need to think much further away. Let's think about Africa in terms of 50 years away. And they started to use sources of music like Sun Ra and of literature. And that's basically where Afrofuturism is embedded in, right? But you say, I don't want to deal with that, with Afrofuturism. That's not your cup of tea, correct? Mm-hmm. Why?
Because the Afrofuturism comes from the United States, basically.
From African Americans, my friend. Yeah, Sun Ra, all these people around, the science fiction and
but it's also related to their reality, which is their They are descendants of slaves, and even when they were freed, they were not given any land. And it's still a colonial state, basically, where they don't have land.
So Afrofuturism is a way, another way to express themselves.
But it's also even the reconnection with the continent, which is also, I mean, it goes through, I mean, a lot of restrictions and how to connect with ancestors and how to connect with the land that is not given to you. And then you need to find another space.
Another
basically.
concept, another space. Yeah.
But I do have land in Congo or in Africa. I can retrace my ancestors. I can. So there's another relation to territory, even though that the extraction are happening and this violence that it's been happening. But still, I mean, there's another notion that is related, and when it comes to way of dealing with life or the philosophy of life, from Lubas to Chokwe, everyone has a way of dealing with that. So, and that is not Afrofuturism. It's not the same reality. It's not connected to technology, especially like when it comes to Western technology. It's quite problematic.
One of the most fascinating projects is when you were working and living in Rome at the Villa Medicis, that you got access to the Vatican and to the museums of the Vatican, and that you started to research the collection and classification of objects of the Congo in Italy since 1450.
Yeah. And this is the art historian Bassani, who published a book, and that is accessible, but it was done with the British museums, where he was really interested in retracing actually the presence of African artifacts in European collections. And just as you said, from 1450 you had already all these objects going on, traveling as a diplomatic gift or as trades, basically goods, and then they were collected also by Jesuit missionaries who were in Congo since the 15th centuries and even before. So it's quite interesting, and I was really interested actually to look at the life or even the statues of this object through time, from like the 15th century to now.
From the Wunderkammer to colonial objects.
And knowing that some of them, for example, were presented for when the Capitolini Museum opened. So Capitolini is the first museum to open, and some of these objects were presented.
They were already
coming
there.
From the Jesuit collection, were presented at a Capitolini. Louvre is inspired by Capitolini Museum, basically. But it's quite interesting to see today that these objects are, some of them, part of them, are considered to be part of ethnographic collection, just because Pigorini, who started the ethnographic museum in Italy after the unification of Italy, and he started, and he was an ethnographer, and he was interested in creating the collection. And the Vatican was no longer a country, so they were. So the Jesuit collection were given to Pigorini, and he introduced them into ethnographic museums. So now they are considered to be ethnographic museum, while they were there even before the academy, the Fine Art Academy, or even these classifications, basically. But funny enough is that some of them in 1922, they were shown at the Venice Biennale as artworks, aside or beside all these Greco-Romans, that we do love.
So these objects are constantly shifting.
So who's shifting their meaning? So who has this power to kind of change? And that's where it's quite complicated.
Last subject, because it's 9:12. Your installations are becoming more and more complex. They're becoming also more and more bigger, complex also in the sense that complex. I mean, many different ideas coming together. And you were in the Venice Biennale, you were in Documenta, and now you're going to work in Leuven. Can you talk about the project which is coming up in Leuven?
Yeah, so in Leuven, I've been invited because it's both Louvain-la-Neuve and Leuven. I've been invited because in the next year and the other one, so 26, they will be celebrating the 600th anniversary of the existence of the university. Basically.
600 years.
600 years of. So they invited me both for different purposes, but still.
So you're the big unifier now. I mean, it's like incredible. Sammy Baloji is going to unify Belgium again, Louvain-la-Neuve and Leuven. Okay, yes. Thank you, Sammy. We needed that. Absolutely.
No. But as it's the university, what was interesting for me is to look at this idea, because we have the Congolese philosopher Valentin Yves Mudimbe, who wrote one of the seminal books on the notion of the invention of Africa, stating that it's all these scientific literatures that were published by Europeans that's created the notion of Africa and the notion of people, and the notion of, but even basically even frontiers when it comes to what happened at the.
This is your most important book, right?
It's quite important for
And
me.
it was only published in English until 2 years ago.
No, in French.
It was only published in French
until
2 years ago, and finally it's now in English available.
And then it's since '88 it was already available in English, but not in French. It's been translated in French only 2 years ago.
That's what I just said. Yeah.
Ah, this is what you said. Yeah. I think I'm tired with your questions.
That's why. That's right. That's why. No, we got it. Okay. It's only in French since 2 years. Don't get me wrong. But for you, this is a kind of Bible. This is connected to the library in Leuven.
No, but the
because
library
he studied in Leuven.
He also studied in Leuven. But what is interesting for me is the library in Leuven. When it comes to the First World War, it was burned and repaired. So it's this idea of repairing, burning and repairing, or reparation when it comes to other knowledges, basically. So after the First World War, there were all these books sent from Japan and so on in order to rebuild the library. And then the Second World War came, it was burned again, and the reparation. And then in '68, it was split in two. So I'm really interested in library as a space of knowledge, basically.
Because he wrote this notion up about la bibliothèque africaine.
La bibliothèque coloniale. So I mean, what we know of Congo or of the African continent, it all goes through the colonial and literature, basically.
Yeah. And he put that together, and that idea, that concept of la bibliothèque coloniale is still a major source of inspiration for thinkers about Africa, because that is what we thought we knew about Africa.
But
right?
it's also even the Africanists and even the Africans themselves are also. It's also like they are producing knowledges through the Western epistemology. Like I'm speaking English, or I'm speaking French because I was obliged to speak French. French is the constitutional language, or that, if I have to be considered to be like an évolué during the colonial time or a civilized person, I have to speak French. Otherwise, I'm not, the constitution is in French. We don't learn the constitution, the Congo's constitution, in our mother tongues and so on. You have hierarchy of languages, basically. And that brings also even African to start to produce knowledge through the Western epistemology. And that's quite problematic, basically. So where to start? So one needs to know about what is the colonial library and what are the other knowledges and how to collect those and how to create another space of resistance or even of identifications or even other philosophies, basically. So these are the three elements that I will be working on in Leuven, like bringing together, knowing that actually Mudimbe is retired, and what he decided to do is to give to the University of Lubumbashi his private library. I mean, all the books that he's been collecting, he just sent them. So the idea is to look at these three libraries, but with this notion of repairing, just as it was burn and recreate and reinvent it and so on.
So we should all buy the book in French now of Midumbi, right?
No, in English.
In English, okay.
Because you impose me to speak in English rather than French.
And you are now becoming finally civilized because you get the Belgian passport. Bravo. Sammy Baloji, thank you so much.